Okay, so this is some of the stuff that I pointed out, some of the themes and things that I noticed in Beowulf and that we went over in the previous video. So just for your information, some directions that you can go in or think about is questions around the narrator. Who is the narrator? What is their intention? What are they saying? Why are we talking about this? Who is Beowulf to the narrator? Is he or she a Dane, a Geat, an outside observer? There's a lot of allusions or a lot of imagery and themes surrounding inside versus outside. The Christian lens on the tale. I would argue that it's not like necessarily case closed, a Christian tale. It seems like some kind of Christian lens on a tale. Perhaps when the scribe wrote it down, they added that lens to it based on the time period and the move for Anglo-Saxons to gain power and to Christianize the tribes around them. I mean, this is the start of what we will later see to be Christianity in England. Contrasts and parallels. So throughout the tale, there's a lot of contrasting imagery, obviously light and dark, who's a hero, who's not a hero, right? Unferth versus Beowulf. But then Wiglaf is an interesting character that occurs later, death and life. And then the parallels where you see these different tales being told throughout, right? Stories within stories throughout all of Beowulf, but they all seem to parallel each other. They seem to be telling the same story again and again and again in different ways, almost reflecting like a cycle of life, like that this is the way it is, and this will always continue to happen, and almost reflected in that conversation, the dragon piece about Earth returning to Earth, right? Everything's come from the Earth and everything will go back to the Earth. Beowulf, I just want you to think about, who is Beowulf? What is he really like? Like this character, this guy. And look at the way that Devana Headley paints Beowulf, like that character. Do you see a connection? Do you think hers is a wild interpretation? I really saw a lot of connection there for me, but tell me what you think. It'll be interesting. Grendel and His Mother. So again, who are the characters of Grendel and His Mother? Devana obviously spends a lot of time, or Maria Devana Headley spends a lot of time on this, that her main character is Grendel's mother. And Grendel is pictured as a small boy, which then your empathies and sympathies and feelings really change around Beowulf through that lens, right? How old is Grendel in the tale of Beowulf that we just read? This mother avenging her son's death. Description of women, Beowulf. So in Beowulf, it's hard to see in this particular translation because a lot of those chunks are the pieces that are missing. But we have Grendel's mother. There is this discussion about the widow Hildeburh and how she remarries, and there's some kind of union of she does some kind of peacekeeping or something of that nature through her marriage. Again, it's vague and it's just through summary. So you always want to take summaries with a grain of salt. That is a reader's interpretation to you, right? So it's very different. That's just like a secondary text versus reading the primary text and seeing what you see. And then stories within stories, that cycle of life theme. And then finally, kings and God in quotes. So there is this dual parallel structure of a king as the head, a monotheistic, a single king, and a monotheistic God, and that there's a hierarchy and people are destined to be king or and they're deemed by God. So there seems to be that connection, and that connection's happening in life at the time that this is written down. Okay. So when you enter the Mere-Wife, these are some things you want to notice. The structure of the novel, it's not linear, so prepare yourself. How is that narration? Who's the narrator there as compared to the narrator in Beowulf? You want to think about similar themes and if they carry over: gods, religion, inside versus outside, contrast, parallels. Does she pick up on that kind of stuff in her novel? Also, go ahead and make sure you make note and notice of the characters in the text, and think back to if they have any relationships to different characters that you see in Beowulf. Women, men, and gender roles, huge theme in Devana's The Mere Wife. Think about the title, The Mere Wife. Multiple levels of meaning there. Also in terms of heroes and warriors, that's really related to the conversation that you're going to see come out of reading Judith. The mountain, the mere, Harriet Hall, look at the way places and the settings of these different places and how those kind of almost emerge as characters in and of themselves, similar to Harriet Hall, similar to the mere in Beowulf. Blood, water, fire, death, time. There are certain images that continue to occur in the Mere Wife, and images in various manifestations, similar to the way water appears throughout Beowulf. So look for those. And monsters, animals, who's monsters, who are animals, who are humans, wild versus civilized, nature, versus buildings and things created by people, systems. So look for all of those. Okay, so let's talk about Judith. You're reading that this week and you're thinking about it just in terms of Beowulf. These two manuscripts were found together. So returning back to our original conversation about canon. So we read Beowulf. Everyone reads Beowulf. Sometimes it starts early. You read it multiple times in a lifetime if you're an English major by the time you get here. Judith, however, is not necessarily a text you read again and again and again. Yet both these texts were found together in the same manuscript at the same time. Judith is an interesting tale. It is a clearly religious tale. Well, it's not a clearly religious tale itself as written by the poet, but it comes from a religious tale, the book of Judith in the Bible. And it specifically comes from the Vulgate version of the Bible, which is here the late 4th century Latin translation of the Bible, became the Catholic Church's official version of the Bible during the late 16th century. So that's what our Judith poem is adapted from this version of the biblical story of Judith. And it's said that it was written for this queen, Ethelfled. She was the daughter of Alfred the Great, and she ended up being a ruler after her husband's death, which was unusual at the time. So in 911 AD, we had a woman ruler. So there are scholars that believe that this poem, Judith, was written for her as a gift. She did fight alongside her military, so she was a warrior. She was also a negotiator. And negotiator, as you'll see, is a more typical role for women during the Anglo-Saxon period. So there are multiple gender roles that you see as a common theme in Anglo-Saxon literature. Women are often peace weavers, which means they create peace between warring factions. That's usually their role in these texts. It would be interesting to look back at Beowulf for that. They have the power of words, so they often keep the peace rather than through fighting. They use words, they tell stories, things like that. They are virgins, of course. They are passive versus active in the way that they handle situations. And they are often on the periphery of a piece of literature. The men, by contrast, the typical roles they take in Anglo-Saxon texts: hero, protectors, they represent bravery. They engage in physical battles, shows of strength, obviously, think Beowulf, obviously. Blood feud, they engage in blood feuds, right? They're out for vengeance, they're avenging people. They fight to the death. They take aggressive versus passive actions, and they are often central to the narrative. So when you read Judith, what you want to think about is the way the poet wrote Judith. The poet plays with these gender roles in Judith, and the main character is a woman. So she is occupying the center rather than the periphery. So take a look, and I can't wait to see what you think. And then we're going to take all of that also with us into the reading of The Mere Life.